Hello and welcome to episode 20 of Widnes Rugby Chat Podcast, the first one of the off-season. We're back after a few weeks break. And quite a lot to talk about. But in this episode, we're going to focus solely on the IMG grading score that was handed down to Widnes recently, that has Widnes ranked in 22nd of the professional rugby league clubs. Widnes' score a lowly 8.6. In this episode, myself and Mike Parsons will have a natter about the score and the potential impact. We'll review, both myself and Mike were at the fans forum that was held at the DCBL Stadium a week or so ago, where club chairman Stuart Murphy and directors Rod Steele and Roger Harrison explained in quite a lot of detail the process and where Widnes had dropped points. We'll even hear from Stuart Murphy himself in this episode of the podcast as well. And then we'll just talk a little bit about the fallout or the subsequent fallout of what's happened and what we can look forward to in the near future. So let's get straight into it, Mike. As I mentioned, we were both at the night in the Bridge Suite, and I thought it was very informative. If of course frustrating and disappointing. I guess there's not been a great deal of communication out, so there was only maybe 100 people perhaps who were in the Bridge Suite on the night. They're the only people at the moment that have seen what we saw, and we'll try and break it down in the night. But just give me your general thoughts to start off with.
Yeah, I thought the evening was it was a real beneficial one, certainly for myself. I thought Stuart Murphy come across really well. I thought he really wore his heart on his sleeve and just delivered it as it was. I thought, he did really well delivering the message and, informing fans that the club is as frustrated as what the fans' initial reaction was. In terms of the grading that we was given, my opinion on it was I was expecting us to drop a bit. So dropping wasn't a surprise. It was probably more the nature of how big the drop off was. I think was there only Newcastle who dipped further than what we did, in terms of distance from 12 months ago. I think I was expecting us to go down, obviously on attendances. We know because of recent on-field performances, took an impact in season ticket sales. But certainly situations to do with the stadium and stuff like that, there were certainly a few on goals in there, wasn't there?
Yeah, and I think to be honest, the score's gone down, and I think when you look at it, it probably Widnes have got to take some responsibility for it. But I think in the grand scheme of things, if you're saying to me, I just don't believe whatsoever that Widnes are the 22nd strongest club in the professional ranks. I just can't see how Widnes would be that low. But ultimately, that's the name of the game at the moment, and how long it will last remains to be seen. For those of you who don't know a great deal about it, or probably don't care a great deal about it, to be quite honest, I've obviously spent a lot of time reading through the criteria and even working on the criteria to a point. Since it was implemented, I was at quite a few of the early IMG press conferences when it was first introduced, and so there's 5 main pillars, isn't there? We'll try and break down the score. Now, the club haven't published this, so my breakdown is perhaps an unofficial breakdown, but I don't think I'm miles off. The fandom score, as far as I can see, was the same as what it was last year, which was 3.3 out of 5. How that score is made up of is basically social media following, social media engagement, attendances. There's some TV viewership nonsense, which doesn't matter because there's no TV deal. But I think perhaps we in some ways, you probably expected that fandom score to go down, but it didn't, because it would appear that Widnes didn't hit the 3,000 attendance barrier last season, and of course didn't this season. So it's actually perhaps a positive that they'd not fallen. I think one of the headline points from was that Widnes' average crowd last season was only 1,900, although it was announced as a bit more than that, I think about 2,600. It would appear that IMG are now only taking into consideration the actual attendances of matches. That is people, that is basically bums on seats, whereas traditionally attendances have been made up of, well, if 500 season ticket holders don't turn up, they're still counted on the attendance for that game. Clearly, there's work to do for Widnes on attendances, but then, as I say, going back to that 20-second thing, ultimately, Widnes' average attendances must be in the top. I think Widnes must be in the top 16 clubs on average attendance. So, as much as there is work to do, it's difficult. It'd be hard. I don't know. What do you think, Mike? Would it be hard to get over the 3,000? Which is is where you're getting the extra point, the extra half a point.
Look, I think to do that within the next 12 months is a bit of an ask, I think. But if we have another season like we did the season just gone, I don't think it's unreasonable, and I certainly don't think it's out of reach. Recent crowds in the last 10 years are a clear indicator that 3,000 people regularly go into the stadium is not an impossible task. I suppose when you allude to being placed 22nd, and by our standards 1,900 is really low, but to other clubs, Keighley, for example, who finished above us, Sheffield being another one, if they got 1,900 in their stadium every week, they'd be absolutely laughing and it'd be a massive success for them. So it's just a real frustration point, that the whole grading system in general, and that's just one example of a frustration from fans and obviously clubs as well. But I think personally, if they're talking about a 6-year plan, as at 2, 3, 4 years time. If Alan keeps doing what he's doing with the playing squad, and the players keep performing, and we keep adding to what we've got, I certainly think that 3,000 barrier is achievable. It really is,
and it's a good way of mobilising people as well, because it's a clear thing that you can monitor and provide a metric of. If you're getting 3,000 every week and you're announcing 3,000, people can see how many we might need. There was some people questioning why didn't Widnes give a load of tickets away for the last few games to try and bump the attendances up. Whether that's the right thing to do, who knows? But at least there's something there that you can monitor. You touched on it a bit there, Mike, where Stuart Murphy did mention a 6-year plan to reach Super League. And by reaching Super League, he meant hit the 15-point Grade A ranking, which effectively guarantees you Super League. In some ways, and this might sound like a criticism, and I don't mean for it to be a criticism, it's a shame that that's the first time we've heard that. Now, the club internally might have these plans, and I get that they don't want to get people's hopes up too much. But it was almost like and I don't mean this disrespectfully, it was almost like a throwaway comment on the night to say, well, we thought we had a 6-year plan for Super League, and I'm sat there thinking, oh, well, this is news to me. And is that maybe a side where I thought the night was excellent. I thought it was very informative. I thought it was great. But I actually thought in some ways it's a shame that, as I say, only 100 people were there to see it. And I also maybe think that perhaps that's one of the things the club could improve on, is communicating this stuff better. Because if they've been sat on this for a year thinking we've got a 6-year Super League plan, well, why not tell people? Because that's the way that they're going to get fans and sponsors behind them. You only have to see. It's not been so bad this year, of course, because things have gone pretty well. But in previous years, one bad thing happens, and you've got doom-mongers saying, "Oh, the club's struggling for money, etc., etc." So 6-year Super League plan, however feasible or not you might feel that to be. Are you surprised? I mean, did you know about it, Mike? You might know, but what are your thoughts on all that?
No, well, it was news to me as well. I think it was news to everybody, and yourself, James, who speaks to the club on a regular basis through the media. If you don't know, then what chance have most fans got? I think we'll touch upon it, later in the episode. Obviously, Chris Hamilton, up until recent times, has kind of took charge of them events. One of my, it's not a criticism of the board, because look, at the end of the day, if they wasn't doing their jobs, there wouldn't be a rugby club, and anybody who invests in rugby league in general, you can't knock at all, really, because there's not much profit in it. But I have always thought that the board need to be a bit more vocal and show the face a little bit more, and it was really good to see. I think Stuart, did a real good job, and he connected with the 100 or so people that was there, and people really took to him. And I think it's important. I think people can go too far sometimes. You don't need the board speaking up every time somebody turns on the light, but at times like that and Members Mondays, it's good to hear from the board, and fans want to know the direction of the club. And if they hear that and get regular updates, it goes that little bit further into engaging with people. And the more, at the end of the day, the more engaged your supporters are, the more likely they're going to come to games, get season tickets, etc., etc. So for me, it was great to see, and I hope there's more of it, because, like you said, it was informative, and they did a good job of it, and I think they can do a bit more.
Yeah, and I think you've got to realise as well, it's not a case of the board don't have to come out and make statements all the time. They can communicate what's going on in different ways, the way, telling the story of what they're doing. It doesn't have to come as a board statement all the time, but if you're putting out the right messaging here and there, it'll soon filter through to people. Mention Stuart there, and again, we're going to hear from him shortly in this episode. It's worth noting that Stuart's allegiances in terms of rugby traditionally have lain elsewhere. I'm sure these days he's very much Widnes or nothing. But Roger and Rod are clearly die in the wool Widnes people and Widnes fans. Whereas, to be fair to Stuart Murphy, he's come in, done his bit to keep the club going, and now he's, bad sounds of it's, devoting more and more of his own time as chairman to take things forward. So I think it's worthwhile acknowledging that. If you want to read, we'll carry on going through this score anyway, this IMG score. If you want to read, I have broken it down on widnesrugby.com. I did a blog post on there. Hopefully you'll find a link. I'll put it in the descriptions of this podcast. So fandom, there was no change. Performance, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that Widnes did better last season than in previous seasons, making the playoffs for the first time since relegation from Super League. So that nudged the performance score up slightly to 1.8, a massive 1.82 out of 5, which was 0.1 more than last season. So that was an up. Now this is where we're going to go down into the losses. Finance, 2 out of 4.5 were scored. That was down 0.25 on last season, as far as I know. The finance pillar is really interesting, Mike, because clearly owning your own ground has a massive impact, because although if you're renting a ground, as Widnes do, you can class it as an asset in some ways through primacy of tenure or other things. If you own your own ground, your turnover is going to be higher because you generate more money. You generate the non-match day revenue, the beer sales, the food sales. I think an example was made of Barrow. I think there was someone crashed into a wall at their ground, a perimeter wall, and the repair bill for that effectively came in on their turnover mark, which, you might look and think, oh, well, that's a bit fortunate, but that's the name of the game. Breaking down the score, Widnes scored 0.5 for non-centralised turnover, which is effectively the turnover you generate that's outside the Sky funding, the central funding. So Widnes generated more than £500,000 in non-centralised funding, and that means non-centralised turnover, I should say. And as that is 83% of the club's overall turnover, it meant Widnes scored fairly well on non-centralised turnover percentage. Are you still with me, Mike?
I'm with you.
Now, Widnes posted a small loss, I think is what Stuart said, which means Widnes only scored 0.25. If they were able to post a profit of £1, that would earn a further 0.25, and accounts, of course, run a year behind. So at the moment, this year's figures are based on the accounts up to the end of 2023. Stuart Murphy seems to suggest that they'll definitely be posting some sort of profit, whether it be small, for the 2024 figures. So it sounds like there's going to be an uplift there. The big one in the finance pillar where other clubs are probably benefiting his owner investment. So I think Widnes' owner investment score is 0.25. If you had an owner who was putting in $500,000, that would give you an extra 0.25 points. Now, clearly, if you had an owner putting in $500,000, you'd open up to other things. But I did think Rod Steele made a good point. I've seen some people sort of question it a little bit on Twitter, where Rod made the point of, if you give away loads of tickets for free and it costs you X amount in revenue to do that, is it worth? He said that, I think it was £7,000, he said, wasn't it? Where if they got the extra 0.5 points for attendances, they would get an extra £7,000 in central funding. To get that extra £7,000 in central funding, they would have had to spend X amount to get the fans in. So sometimes it's a bit like, is it worth it? I think that was the point that he was trying to make, because I think, given all the hysteria about it, the bottom line is that before the IMG grading, Widnes win the championship. After the IMG grading, Widnes win the championship. That's the bottom line. That's the reality of the situation. I don't know. And it's a shame. I think I made this point separately. It's a shame that the club have to deal with all this negativity when in reality, it doesn't really matter in the short term, because they would have been in the championship anyway. And instead of being able to build on the progress that Alan Coleman had made with the team last season and selling season tickets, they've got to deal with this negativity.
Yeah, look, like I say, referring to what Rod said, it's quite right, and it's one of them as a supporter and supporters. They only see the ideal picture, as in get more fans in and more people through the game. Looks good. There's a better atmosphere for the players, etc., etc. But when you put it into finances, you're probably losing more than what you're going to gain off the pillar. It's right, isn't it? And at the end of the day, it's got to be profitable. There is no benefactor. And until we have one, all the money that comes in, it's vital income. And unfortunately, we're just not in a position where you can hand out, pound tickets. I think we've been down that route before, haven't we? To make everything look good. And then, long afterwards, things come out and it's not all sunshine and rainbows, is it?
It's the same with the we'll go on the stadium bit in a minute, but it's the same about the big screen and the LED boards. I think they quoted it was something like it was upwards of £100,000 to install a big screen and LED boards, and that would earn you an extra 0.25 points. Now, clearly, if you were 0.25 points off Super League, you might think it was worth the investment to tip you over the edge. But given Widnes' current situation, well, one, they haven't got the £100,000 to throw in. But even if they did have the £100,000, what is the point in throwing it in on that to gain 0.25 points?
Well, that's it. I mean, everybody's getting, frustrated with IMG at the best of times, aren't they? Like potentially somebody finishing above you in the leaderboard because of an insurance claim. We're moving further and further away off the field. And if you are to tick some of these boxes, the only place that money can come from to tick some of these boxes is to take it out the playing budget. Now, if you do that, you're cutting your arms and your legs off, aren't you? And you're going to damage attendances. The product on the pitch, is finally getting better. And, Alan would be wrestling with, one, sometimes two hands behind his back. There's simply no point to it. There really isn't.
A couple of points we'll round off on the finance one. I think Widnes have got to take a little bit of responsibility for this. They lost 0.25 on primacy of tenure at the stadium because they didn't have it written into their contract. They only had it in the form of a letter or some sort of guarantee from the CEO of Halton Borough Council. For me, that is something that maybe they could have got on top of. Stuart Murphy alluded to the fact that they have got on top of it now and it will be right for next season, but it could have, I suppose, saved them a little bit of aggro now. I think perhaps the The other point that was made that was quite interesting was about the contributions of Widnes Vips. So if you were, if you put, and obviously Widnes Vips are nowhere near these levels, but if you, Mike Parsons, put in £500,000 as owner investment, you might only have a 10% share in the club, let's say, and you put £500,000 in, that earns you 0.5 points. Whereas if Widnes Vips put in £500,000 as a fan, well, not investment vehicle, but a fan fundraising vehicle, you won't get any points for that. And it sounded like that was being queried as to whether that was something that could be explored. So it seems that there's a path. I wrote in my little piece here that I think there's a path for Widnes to grab an extra 0.5 points at least. Stuart Murphy did seem to suggest that they've already pretty much boxed off 1.33 points, which, to be honest, as you said at the start, Mike, if you'd have put 1.33 points on Widnes' score that they got in the end, they probably wouldn't be too far off where you would have expected them to have been.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier as well. You know, I think, like you've just said, I think there have been a couple of own goals. You know, a couple of things we could have done better to avoid certain, problems and issues, and and ultimately losses in scoring. Just the more you go through it again, though, to me, maybe it's just me. I'm not too sure, but some of these points and criteria, there just seems to be cracks and loopholes and flaws in them where certain clubs can get around them and others can't. Like you've just alluded to there with the fan contribution. If one person gives it, it's it can be kind of investment. But then if Vips do it and it's a group of people, it's a donation. It just sounds messy, and
loopholes and interpretations, I think, are good. I think that's a good way of and there will always be loopholes and interpretations in any sort of criteria like this. And I think that the problem is with loopholes is that they're fine when you're able to make use of them, but when someone else is making use of them, they become an issue. And I think sadly, Widnes of probably all the clubs are actually the one who's coming out on the wrong side of a lot of these things, because on the face of it, Widnes have got a lot of the things that you would expect to need to run a professional club. They've got the facilities, they've got the history, they've got the fan base, they've got the location to a point, they've got the infrastructure there. They're just missing whether I wouldn't even know what they're missing. They're missing maybe the benefactor side, but then there are clubs without a benefactor who are doing okay. It is people might have already switched off this podcast by now, to be honest, but it's just a shame that so much energy has to go on this. Stadium was perhaps a surprising point. By my calculations, Widnes lost about 1.3 points on the stadium compared to last year. Now, the club were keen to point out that the council were very supportive, and that it's not the council's fault whatsoever. Whether that means Widnes are taking some of the blame themselves. It's a shame they've not published the slides, actually, because from memory, and you hopefully remember this, Mike, they got on the screen all the criteria related to stadium, and the two that Widnes failed on were basically broadcast facilities for parking, and the number of press seats. Now, because I was tweeting on the night, and so I was sort of making notes as I went along. From memory, I think that you need 30 seats in the press box, and Widnes have got 24. Now, it'd be very easy. I think this was mentioned. I might have got this confused with something else. It would be very easy for Widnes to put in 6 extra tables on the press box to turn it from 24 to 30. And I suppose you would ask the question, well, why bother? Because at least half of the 24 never get used. But ultimately, if that's the criteria, that's the criteria. There seems to be some confusion over, or not confusion, but Widnes said, well, we have got a broadcaster parking, but we don't need it, so we don't have it open. But if they did need it, it's there. And it's just these, I suppose, like you say, these silly things that you're arguing about, that do they really matter? And does it define how big of a rugby club Widnes are, that whether they have 30 parking spots for broadcast?
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, it's absolute madness to the point of, I think it was mentioned, Lee Rec is now, officially we can open it to make up the parking specs. It's absolute madness when we're even having to talk about this. You're getting marked as a club on car parking spaces. It's just absolutely unbelievable. You look at, I think fans of other clubs mention this, and it's absolutely bang on. You look at our stadium, it is better than not the majority, but it's better than a lot in Super League. It's as simple as that. It is as simple as that. But yet you're losing points on parking spaces. It's just unbelievable, James. I don't really have any words for it, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think certainly if you look at some of the teams Widnes have ended up beneath, you're frustrated by it. But
not to mention, by the way, we're not even on telly, so we can't even get points
on telly.
Well, that's what I mean. It's all irrelevant anyway.
Yeah. One interesting point, and one of the things that was being talked about on social media is attendances is one thing. Another part of the criteria is the utilisation figure. Now, the utilisation figure is what percentage of your stadium do you use? Now, Huddersfield, this screws them massively. I mean, they don't get many fans anyway, but they're playing 25,000 seat stadium, so they get screwed because they get an extra one. Whereas a club like Sheffield, for instance, and this is probably one of the reasons Sheffield are above Widnes, they play in a stadium that probably has 2,000 capacity. So when they get 1,500, they're getting 0.85 points or something. Whereas Widnes, who are getting 1,900 in a 12,000 stadium, are only getting 0.1 something. What I thought was interesting that Widnes were arguing, this is almost a loophole in many ways. Widnes are arguing, well, hang on, we only lease the north and south stand off the council. So surely only the capacity of the north and south stand should count towards Widnes's attendance, towards Widnes's capacity, which would in turn increase Widnes's utilisation figure. So the total capacity of the north and south stand is 7,250. Now, if Widnes were to average 3,500 in a 7,250 capacity, that's half a point. Yeah. That's half a point they would be getting. Whereas at the moment they're only getting, I think, 0.16 based on the current figures. And literally it'd be exactly the same stadium, the exact same number of people would be turning up. But if you can get this loophole in place, you're all of a sudden gaining 0.4 points for not actually doing anything.
Well, yeah. Well, essentially, again, it's cheating, isn't it? Because let's be honest, unless someone's knocked them down since the rugby season finished, we've got 2 other stands. But again, the pillar is completely wrong. Surely the IMG era is all about progressing and growing clubs. And ultimately, again, you use Sheffield as a great example. You're rewarding a club that, if they was to go to Super League, would be limited. You can only fit a limited amount of people in it, and they're getting rewarded for that. Surely the idea should be, well, if you grow as a club, you can get more fans in, and the potential of higher crowds is there and ready to go. Surely that should be the pillar, not smaller clubs with smaller stadiums getting more points. Again, it's just madness, really, to me.
Yeah, we'll round this off quickly. Community Widnes scored 1 out of 2.5. It's fairly straightforward, this pillar. The capacity of Halton is lower than 130,000, so you only get 0.5 points for that. And then the turnover of the foundation is above 50,000, but lower than 250,000. So Widnes in for 0.5 points for that. If they were to nudge over the 250,000 turnover mark, then that would be worth another 0.25 points. Catchment areas, don't really want to get into this massively, but if Widnes, ultimately you can't do anything about it. Your local authorities' population is what it is, and at some point it'll change, and at some point Widnes might be able to sneak another couple of points, another half a point. but ultimately they are where they are. If you think it's stupid if you think Widnes' situation is bad, London only got 0.5 points as well.
Do you fancy explaining that one, James, or do you reckon you need another hour?
Yeah, basically, the short version is because London got catchment area points based on the borough that they play in. So I think it's Merton, which is where Wimbledon is, and the population of that is lower than 130,000. Now, clearly, London have got London's catchment. London should be getting maximum points for catchment area because not only is London massive, there's no other clubs there, so they're not even fighting. To be honest, I don't have any problems with Widnes only having 0.5 because the bottom line is Widnes is a relatively small place. Yeah. If it was a relatively small place where the neighbouring towns weren't Super League clubs already, then fine. But Barrow, for instance, I have no problem with Barrow getting high score in catchment area because as much as people might say, oh, well, they tweaked the boundaries changed, which it wasn't Barrow's doing. They just created a new council in the South Lakes. But I have no problem with Barrow getting them points because there's no other teams around there. So that is their catchment area. Whereas ultimately, Widnes' catchment area is Widnes because Widnes and Runcorn. Because if you go outside of those places, Warrington and St Helens are there already. So, So that in total brings the score to 8.78. Well, I got them to 8.78. The official total was only 8.6. So I don't know until the club publish it officially. We won't know exactly, but hopefully they'll clarify that. I think that leads us in nicely to my catch up with Stuart Murphy, which I did on the night at the Fans Forum. First time I'd spoken to him really in an extended interview. I thank him very much for actually speaking to me on the podcast. You might have heard it already. I think it's been on BBC Radio Merseyside, but here it is in full. Stuart Murphy, Widnes chairman. How much of a surprise was it when the score came through from IMG?
It was a big surprise, especially on the initial one. I mean, as you've just seen up on the screen, we got 7 point something to start with. I think it was 7.15. Little things like minimum standards not being met, etc. 2.5 points deducted 3 times. Utilisation incorrectly calculated and things like that. I mean, these are development plans that are signed off by the RFL, but yet RFL haven't got knowledge of them being there.
What was your initial reaction, and what did you have to do to sort of pick yourself up from the canvas when it came through?
Well, I was actually on holiday. I was in Lanzarote and picked it up and was instantly, what on earth is this? We had a teams meeting with Alison O'Brien and Tony Sutton to try and address the initial things. I think it was actually recorded at something like 75 emails that went back and forth, because I have actually apologised to the RFL since for the amount of contact that I had, just going back and forth saying, right, I've amended one thing, can you now confirm that that's right? I've amended that, can you now confirm that's right? Rather than sending it all back together, I wanted to know that each individual thing was addressed at that time. So yeah, it was a massive shock. Obviously, I was in Lanzarote, Chris was over here, the other directors obviously on WhatsApp. We must have spent, over the course of 3 days, we must have spent 20 hours on the phone just trying to sort things out.
You've got a few businesses, clearly very meticulous in all those businesses. Is it even more frustrating when you're looking at, this criteria, you're following it as you see fit, and then it comes back and it's different to what you thought it'd be?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in terms of, like the owner investment, for instance, we specifically asked the question, can that be included? And we're advised in the opinion, no. And then we found out that other clubs have done it. Well, why should it be included? Catchment, again, you can't do anything about it, but borders change and other clubs get awarded so many more points for it. I mean, and they've done nothing wrong. Like I said before, there's nothing wrong with that. They've not done anything wrong, but it's just wrong that we can't do anything to pick that back up. In terms of finances, we had a knockdown by the RFL for having a negative balance sheet when there was stuff in there that was waiting for money coming back in, and it was actually HMRC refund, so it's guaranteed money, you're definitely getting it. And we had to provide evidence, and then we had to provide evidence again for it to get overturned, to make sure that balance sheet went on when we'd worked to make sure that by the 30th of November that was a positive balance sheet to make sure that we got those points.
Can you talk a bit about the stadium as well? I know a few people have been saying, is it to do with that and the size of the stadium? Just talk about the relationship with the council and how that's going.
Relationship with the council is brilliant, and that's why there was a specific slide on that about the council. The council are working with us constantly. The CEO of the council, the head of the stadium here, we're in regular contact all of the time. It instantly went out, and because it was going out on the RFL's grading criteria to say that the points were deducted in the stadium, we put it on our social media to say that it's gone down in the stadium criteria. And as soon as we did that, people were jumping on the council. The council have done absolutely nothing wrong in this. In actual fact, the council, I said, have made sure that they're opening another car park. They're going to open the back gates. I mean, it's never going to happen. The broadcasters aren't going to be here. But the fact of the matter is now, it is logistically planned and it is documented to say that we can do that, and this is how it will happen if that eventuality comes to light. But that's all from working with the council. The council have literally not stopped helping us and then taken a load of stick online for it.
You come into this off the back of a good season, made the playoffs, there was a buzz about the club. Is it even more frustrating that instead of focusing on that and driving season ticket sales, you've got to deal with the negativity that comes with this score?
100%. I mean, this has literally taken over our life for the last 10 days. Not only that, I mean, obviously the work we should have been doing today, we should have been doing the finance renewals. That had to stop because we were doing this to get this ready for tonight, but we felt it was so important to make sure we were here at the earliest opportunity. And like I said in the thing, we were here until... I was away until Thursday night, and then there was events on in here Friday, Saturday and Sunday. So tonight was the first opportunity we've got. The football's actually on next door, and they've switched us around to make sure we could have the screen so that we could have the stuff on screen to make sure we race. So it was so important that we had to address it. But yeah, it has taken all the time away from us. Like I say, so people will be on the phone tomorrow saying Premium Credit was supposed to be in touch with me today and they haven't been, and that's because we now haven't sent the paperwork to them because it should have gone this morning.
Yeah, and I suppose in many ways, regardless of the criteria, Widnes would have been a championship club next season, no matter what. And so
it would, but it's so important on that funding. I mean, like I said before, each point is worth approximately £15,000, and when we're 1.5 down from where we should be, that's £22,500. Who accounts for that in budget next year? Because we can't take that away from the playing squad. We've already given Alan his budget and he knows what he's working to. So now we've got to try and recuperate that 20 odd grand from somewhere else.
How do you feel like you'll do that?
No idea at this minute in time. Obviously there's a lot of discussions we need to have internally, but yeah, I couldn't comment more on that at the minute.
Where do you want it to go moving forward? I know you mentioned that you've almost got guarantees that your score is going to go up next year.
Yeah.
But what's the message to fans that actually you are moving forward and there's the light at the end of the tunnel?
Like I said, we have got the 6-year plan, and the idea on that 6-year plan was that we were going to be hitting that 15 points, and that's the absolute end goal, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't matter if we scrape it back 15.00001. If we get that 15, we're in there. If we get lower than the 15, then obviously there's still a chance that we're going to get to a Super League position. The issue we've got at the minute is that every other club's doing the same as us. And like I said, until the RFL address where these things have been manipulated in different areas, that's where it needs to change, because if not, we could keep improving. But if other people carry on improving because they're putting stuff through different things or different loan accounts or anything else, where else can we go?
What's the immediate thing then that fans and the people with this can do to support you?
Mainly is get online. I'm not going to lie, even from last week when the results went out, social media stick that we started to get, we lost followers instantly. Again, if they're not following us, they're not going to interact with us, we're not going to get the engagements, and therefore we're not going to get the points. Like you said, in terms of the grading, we were nearly getting into that next bracket for engagements. If we lose our followers online, we're going to lose that engagement as well.
What targets do you set yourselves, internally to improve?
We had a lot of targets. I can't really go much further into them at the minute, just because, obviously, now that the grading's come back out and we've already been made aware of changes at the RFL. Bear in mind, this is the IMG criteria that wasn't going to change for 4 years. There's a teams meeting again next week about what potential changes there are for next year. So in terms of the website hits, the engagement, I mean, the Super League club absolutely smashed those targets. Now, we haven't heard anything officially, but I believe that those targets are going to be doubled, if not trebled, next year. It's going to be absolutely massive, and in terms of that, if the point scoring is going to go on, and that's why, again, when I put them points up, if we were scored again next year, on the same criteria, because if that criteria changes, we're going to be further down the ladder again, aren't we? But the only thing we can say from that is that other clubs are going to be in the same position as well, apart from your top flight. But what you're then going to end up with is you're going to end up with your top flight being way ahead and the Championship being left in the middle. And how do you then ever advance back from Championship to Super League if that benchmark keeps getting pushed further and further apart?
And that, of course, must be difficult for you to attract fans, which, of course, help your stadium figures, they help your finance figures, etc., etc. But with that in mind, we'll talk about rugby, but briefly looking ahead to next season. You mentioned that performance is one of the areas where you can improve, and that's ultimately the one thing that excites fans. If you do better in the league and you win more games,
the fans, it gets bums on seats. People are down here. People engage with the club. They follow, like you said, follow us on socials. They engage with us on socials. They bring in revenue into the club that then gives us the money to put better players or more players into the squad to be on that pitch, to be performing more. But the fact of it is, we have had a couple of bad seasons. None of us can say anything about that. But obviously now that we're moving forward, we've had a good year this year. We've got stronger, bigger, fitter players coming through for next year. And let's just hope that we continue more. If we get to 4th next year, it's an advancement on this year, isn't it? More points, more followers, more fans down here.
So, Mike, I know you were hovering around a little bit, listening to that interview at the time. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought Stuart really come across really well on stage and in your interview, James. I think you could visibly see his frustration. There was no doubt about that, and I quite like that. Seeing the human side of somebody. I think. There's certainly an opportunity for Stuart and, of course, the rest of the board as well to do a few more things like that from time to time and maybe hopefully have them on the podcast one day. I think fans would really appreciate it. And
podcast live, that's what we want.
Yeah, there you go. I think it'll help. I think it'll help the board. I think it'll help the board, get more confidence from the fans and things like that and bring it closer together.
Yeah, I think. As I say, I think Stuart explained it well. I think clearly, as I said in the interview, he's got his integrity to uphold, and as far as I can see, he's doing that. He's playing it by the book. It's out of his control if other people aren't, and maybe they'll learn something from that in the next 12 months. We've touched on some of these already, but some of the other discussion points that came up. The biggest one that we've not mentioned, or that was mentioned in the interview, Widnes' central funding is effectively dropped by £22,000 as a result of finishing 22nd. Being graded 22nd. Basically, the central funding allocation is determined by where you rank in that list. Now, whether that's the right thing to do is another thing. But the club were keen to point out that it won't have any impact on the playing budget for next season. Alan Coleman had already been guaranteed, and they'd already made signings, of course. And we'll talk about some of the exciting new signings that have been made in the next episode. But one of the victims, it seems, of that is Chris Hamilton. His departure was announced earlier this week. Clearly, when Widnes have got to be saving some money, was he almost like the obvious, not quite scapegoat, but given when he was announced, it was all about him, his experience and being able to improve the IMG score. Was it inevitable that when that score went down that his head would be on the block, do you think?
I think, it was me actually who asked the question of, obviously the loss of money, kind of, is it going to impact Alan's playing budget? Now, the answer we got, like you've just said, was absolutely not. We can't do that. That's not fair type of thing. Now, straight away, it gets you thinking at the time before all this happened, well, scratching your head, well, when you don't really own any assets other than players and a couple of members of staff, there's only a certain amount of areas where that money can be freed up so it doesn't come out the playing budget. I think there's two things to Chris's departure for me. Obviously, there's no getting away from the fact of when he was appointed, it was there for everybody to see in the article that the IMG score was going to be a massive part of his job. Now, obviously, it's fell. Whether that's solely down to him or, it was a collection of, errors by the club is, I suppose we'll never 100% know the answer to that. But I think on top of that, the other side of it that Stuart mentioned, and again, you just remember things, don't you? When obviously Chris's departure kind of was announced, that it was mentioned that Stuart Murphy is now, I think, was it 3 days, James? He's saying he's at the club. Yeah. And obviously that, with him being a stakeholder and, a board member, if he's there 3 days, it means that you're not having to pay a wage to do them things that he's picking up. And ultimately, when you've got no benefactor and other clubs have chairmen who do that role, they're not paying any chief executive or any head of operations. So straight away, clubs have kind of got a head start on you in terms of cash that can go into the playing budget. Now, obviously, it's a big commitment. Obviously, Stuart has his own businesses, X, Y, and Z, but I did get the strong feeling that Stuart's going to be around a hell of a lot more, and ultimately, it's going to save money.
Yeah, and I think the thing is Widnes are at the point, look, as much as people don't want to admit it, Widnes are a part-time rugby league club. They train 2 nights a week, play on a weekend. There's got to be, as much as, you want to be as professional as possible, there's got to be a bit of reality. And maybe the score has come as a wake-up call to them and thought, well, actually, we need to actually get our hands dirty a little bit here. I think rather than paying out fairly substantial amounts of money for head of operations, maybe it should be you could spend less money on getting people to get their hands dirty and actually get things done based on a strategy, if you like, that the directors set. And I think that's probably been one of the, we talked about the 6-year plan earlier. It's like maybe that's the thing that the board have learned from this process. It's like, right, if we can communicate what the plan is and what the strategy is, we don't need a head of operations or a chief exec or whatever. We're the ones setting that. We just need the people to execute it. And for that, you need the people on the ground, as I say, getting their hands dirty, selling sponsors, coming up with sponsorship deals, doing whatever. If you might have listened to it already, Mike, but people listening, I did do a piece with Paul Salt on BBC Radio Merseyside on Radio Merseyside on Monday, where I talked about this quite a bit. Just got to go back to basics and increase commercial revenue, get more money into the club, do more to communicate with fans, open up new revenue streams. It concerned me. I must admit, I was concerned a few weeks ago when I seen a post on Facebook. I think it was middle of October, and the club are posting saying we've still got space on the kit for next season. Yeah. Sure, I think it was shorts, socks, shirt, back of shirt, something. Like, for it to be October and that being asked, that rang alarm bells in my head, because the kit should basically be already on a container on its way over from wherever it comes from by now, not pushing for sponsors. I have no problem with the message of posting. I think Widnes should do more of that. I think they should do more posting on social asking for sponsorship. But that if they should have done that 3, 4, 5 months ago, in my opinion. So clearly there's been a failure, there's been a breakdown. I think it gives Widnes a good opportunity to reset in some ways. And I suppose that's maybe another question from me to you, Mike, is I think Roger Harrison described it as they were shocked, they were embarrassed, they were disappointed by the score. But do you think actually it has acted as a bit of a wake-up call, and that actually might be the best thing that could have happened?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the only thing you can do, isn't it? You get your score, you've got 2 choices. You can complain about it and all that type of stuff and, take your ball home, or, complain about it to a degree, air your frustrations, but actually knuckle down and go, right, what do we need to do to fix this and move forward? And it sounds like that is the attitude and the approach that is going to be taken. So, yeah, again, Roger, he come across really well when he was saying that. And, if Stuart's going to be there a little bit more now as well, you'd like to think, things like that, the kit that you've just mentioned, then things will be ironed out because he'll be all over it straight away. He'll be there in the building, and obviously he'll be, for the foreseeable, like we may appoint somebody else, but I don't think we will personally. I think you might see a couple more extra members of staff to, support Stuart, but he'll be overseeing it a lot. Also, we've had I don't know if people have noticed as well, the commercial manager who was ahead of all that, he left 2-3 months ago now. And to my knowledge, that position hasn't been, reallocated to anybody else. Nobody else has been hired. So again, that's not great, is it? Do you know what I mean? And
but this is one of the challenges, and this is where I feel like it's about being a bit more realistic. Ultimately, if you've got a commercial manager who's earning, let's say £30,000 a year. Let's say you're paying a commercial manager £30,000 a year, which is probably fairly modest, I guess. They've got to generate £30,000 in revenue just to break even. You might as well have no sponsorship money and not have a commercial, you might as well have no sponsorship money and have no commercial manager than have someone on 30,000 only generating 20,000. You're actually in a better position. And I think that's probably the awkward situation that Widnes find themselves in now, is that they need to strip it back and try and see if they can mobilize people who will do a bit of work to help build the club back up so it's ready to get to a point where it can say, right, well, we're generating 100,000 in commercial revenue. We're going to pay someone 30,000, 40,000 pound a year, and it's up to them, that person, to not only maintain that 100,000 but to grow that 100,000. And I think that's probably. I don't see a massive issue at the moment with them not having people in them roles, because I think you talk about they've lost 22,000 in central funding. They've got to cut the costs of what they're doing. They've not got a great deal of assets to sell. They've got the kit and a few bits and bobs in the stadium, but even I don't know the exact cost, but I can't imagine they even make a load of money off the match sponsorship. Yeah, clearly they'll make a little bit, but if you have a commercial manager who's spending loads of time selling them and they're only making 100 quid, and that commercial manager spent 2 days trying to sell it, it's like, well, I always used to think it's about program. I always used to do my head, and I'd meet with Super League clubs who have media managers on 25 grand a year, and they'd spend 4 days a week editing the program. Yeah. It's like the program didn't make any money.
Yeah, I think my point to it, though, the commercial manager going is like, well, obviously he was there to do a job, and then, you've still on social media advertising for, like, say, sponsorship on kits, etc., etc. It's not a good look. I think to your point there, James, I'm hoping that that's going to be kind of Stuart's view on it, and we are going to go down that road a little bit more, for next season and beyond, and, like you say, hopefully, ultimately save a bit of cash, that you can put into the playing squad.
And the challenge as well for a commercial manager is they need to be mobilized in a way that they know what the direction is.
Yeah.
And my impression has been over the last few years is that no one's been quite sure what the direction is. If that commercial manager is going into a meeting trying to convince someone in Widnes to part with some cash to sponsor, he or she have got to be enthused about it. Right, this is the journey we're on. This is the story that we're telling. This is where we're going. And I just get the impression that whoever is responsible, we just haven't quite been able to say that. Whereas if now they're trying to reset and say, right, look, we've got a 6-year plan to reach this Super League target of 15 points. To get that, we need to generate X amount of revenue a year. We're going to put in these community programs. We're going to have, we've got the development squads going on. We need to sell this many tickets per match. We're going to do this, that, and whatever. And they just need to tell that story better. Now, I think it's extremely difficult to recruit someone in to do that unless the board is telling them exactly what that direction is. Like I say, for me, there's no one better really to probably sell the club than the sorts of people who are in and around, the directors that are there. I know Roger Harrison probably won't forgive me for saying he should be selling commercial stuff, because I'm not saying that at all. But Roger telling the story about Widnes and his passion and enthusiasm for it, that's worth something, in trying to convince people to come on board.
I think that's the kind of the $1 million answer, isn't it? Like you say, Roger there is a great example. I think in a town like this, and rugby league as a sport as itself, that goes a long way. Passion, and Roger, you cut him in half, and he's black and white, isn't he? And I think that, like you say, it counts for something, and he would sell that. He would sell it to people, and his dream, his vision, what the club means to the town. He's got all that. It comes natural. It's just a natural conversation. It doesn't need to be all kind of too corporate, does it? Do you know what I mean? It's about getting a message across. That is it.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. If the club grows and you're back in Super League, and you all of a sudden you're generating £500,000, £1 million a year, whatever, through sponsorship, then clearly, you need a commercial manager to be able to do that. If you've got more inventory and more assets to manage, clearly you do need a commercial manager to do that. But I think Widnes have just got to try and get from point A to point B. And I think at the moment, keeping the costs down, trying to get the direction right, and trying to get people on the journey will be the way forward. Right, hopefully we've explained that a little bit more to people who hadn't seen it already. As I say, if you go on widnesrugby.com, you'll see a breakdown of the score to the best of our knowledge. I'll try and put some links in the description of the podcast. If you want to ask questions on social media, the Widnes Rugby League fans Facebook group, I should say, is growing nicely, Mike. And we're on Twitter as well if you want to reach out to us. Before we let you go, Mike, what else are you up to in this off season? What are your thoughts on the internationals and on the rugby stuff that's been going on?
Internationals, it's been great. A couple of our lads got runs out, didn't they, for Wales? Obviously, a really good win against Serbia. Come short against France, didn't they? But that was always going to be a tough ask. I was looking at the Welsh squad, and there wasn't much Super League experience in there in comparison to France's squad. And then obviously England as well, 2-0, you can't complain. I always feel with England, you can't win as such. Like last year when we comprehensively beat Tonga, everyone was commenting about how Tonga wasn't very good, and then, similar's happened with Samoa. But yet if we'd have been beaten, the whole nation, well, the M62 corridor would have been up raw, you know what I mean? And I thought we're building nicely, and let's have it right, James. Everybody's mouths are watering about the Ashes potentially next year, aren't they?
Yeah. Again, that's all I'm interested, particularly. It's mad because I feel like if England come up against Samoa in World Cups, or Tonga, they seem to struggle. But if it's a Test series, it seems like a walk in the park.
Yeah.
And I think, it'd be great to see Australia. It'd be great to see England, Australia next season.
Pressure, James? Do you think that is tournament pressure?
You know what I actually think it is? I actually think that the teams like Samoa and Tonga benefit from that, the being in camp. And I know they've been in camp on the 2 Test series, but I just think that being at a World Cup and being at a hotel, and, I think there's a bit more about, it's over a 3, 4, 5 week period. I think it probably benefits them a bit more because it's a different group of players that's being pulled together. They're all united by this strong passion for heritage and stuff like that. So I think it's probably more a case of the teams like Samoa and Tonga thrive in the World Cup environment as opposed to the pressure being on England. But I think, for me, England, Australia, it needs to. I can't even remember the last time England played Australia over here. So fingers crossed that happens, and
and
we get to enjoy that after Widnes win the Championship Grand Final next season.
Absolutely. I'm just to finish. I'm on the international game. I'm just pleased that we've got proper international fixtures back, because the charade that you have with the exiles and France, it's a bit of a nothing game. Whereas potentially you could be talking there now where you've had a World Cup backed up by Tonga, then Samoa, then Australia, then you're in another World Cup, and the international scene's been, well, it's been like amateur hour everywhere, hasn't it? Like, the past couple, well, for a long time, to be honest. So I'm just glad to see competitive, regular fixtures back. And on a side note as well, I noticed Matty Fozzard kicked a few goals for Wales as well. So who knows, maybe a new goal kicker for the new season.
Well, hopefully that won't be a problem. But yeah, we'll try and do a podcast in the coming weeks and go through the squad. I'm sure there's still a few more additions to get in, so hopefully they'll get them boxed off. But as always, Mike, thanks for your company. And please do like and share the podcast wherever you do listen to it. And we'll speak to you very soon.